Do you live for speed? I haven't lived for speed in 12 and a half years, as I found out recently when I reinstalled this. Been a extremely long time, and my summer holiday is here. The weather isn't. Oh, there's blue. There's actually some blue. Okay, it's summer. I take that back. And what I hope to do this summer is play some of the sims I haven't played for a long time or haven't played at all. And Live for Speed is one of those weird, old, modern sims. I believe it came out in 2003-ish. So it's about 17 years ago. So since you first played Live for Speed, you could have had a kid and the kid could now have become a drug addict. It could all have happened, you know. It's a big amount of time that has passed. I remember Live for Speed quite well. I did drive it to some extent, especially online, but also not super extensive. I was mainly into Grand Prix Legends, and then I started modding R-Factor. And in fact, on the forums at Live for Speed, I tried to get people to get R-Factor, because the handling in R-Factor you would always spin and die, and in Live for Speed you could always drift and do everything. And I sort of brought R-Factor a bit more towards the Live for Speed, and R-Factor guys might have liked it, but I felt if I can get Live for Speed people to like R-Factor, then the mission is accomplished. So there was on the forums I had my avatar. It was a little sort of MS Paint t-shirt with I made this many Live for Speed players by R-Factor. That was my avatar. It's a big thing. But yeah, the two did end up being closer together than they were before in my opinion anyway, before I started this whole modding stuff. It also means that Live for Speed was better in many ways than R-Factor, because you could control the cars better at extremer angles and have some opposite lock and stuff like that. So for its time, super advanced. It had like tire flex modeled and flat spots, and just the whole feel of it. You know, how many games are there where, yeah, this does look a bit antique now, but anything you can change, you can always also change when you're in game, when you're driving. You can change anything without needing a restart. And that's just, you know, that's so nice. Change the view, multi-screen, whatever you want. It does actually support triple screen, although I did have to rotate the view 45 degrees in order to make it work. I don't know, but whatever. It does seem to work. And it's ancient, but then it also has VR support. So they've sort of come back to it a little bit over the last year or so, it seems. Of course, development was going to be in 3 phases, S1, S2, S3. And S3 would be a new tire model, and we would, of course, get the Volkswagen Scirocco, or what is it called? That never happened. And I think Scaven, one of the main Scaven Roberts programmers, also got confused about tires and started to make a complex new tire model. And things sort of derailed and never really got back to the development pace they had earlier. But so many things in this sim are just done so cleverly and smoothly. So that's neat. What do I remember from driving it? Not so much, really. I remember the quickest sort of Caterham car was very sort of Larry, but that's kind of what you expect. I'll do some driving in the H-pattern cars. Because that's real racing. Oh yeah, now my four-seatback is a bit light. Just press a button and it's heavier. It's a bit crude, because at like 16% I almost get clipping with 10 Newton meters already. So it's not fine control, but you could just adjust it on the fly, and everything is adjustable on the fly, and that's something we forgot was possible. So all the menus here, and there are so many things you can adjust with regarding the view and various modes of how you want the cockpit view to be stabilized or not, if you lock to horizon or with a filter that sort of dampens it out. Now it's locked to the car, but I do allow a little bit of vertical shift. Ironically, the one that I would like is the orientation rate for the camera is not adjustable, But they really thought about a lot of things and a lot of adjustments you could make. And I believe it stores all this per car. So once you set this up for each car, it will remember that. That's just, you know, nice. And everything on the fly. And this is hilarious. The texture memory usage. I did upgrade my graphics card to a 2070 Super just to play this game with all its 45.5 megabytes of memory usage. All of my 8 gigabytes put to good use here. So that's ancient. But the handiness of everything, all the controls, everything you can... Well, this is sort of a little bit antiquated. If you plug a new device in, it doesn't remember the name. So it just keeps numbering your axes and buttons. So if you make a change or it changes the order, then you have to assign everything again. So there's plenty of stuff a bit outdated. But... And of course, sort of a strange sort of style of doing it. But having everything here while you're driving adjustable is just really nice. So that's definitely a plus. And a triple screen VR, you know, it's weird. You got these, DirectX 7 type graphics. Low poly car models as well. So what about the graphics? I kinda don't mind them too much. Live for Speed always looked kinda clean. So it's lacking a lot of effects. Oh. Just as I lack skill. But it always looked fairly sort of brightish, clean, not too saturated. And remember, these are probably the same models and probably to some extent even the same textures that were in like 12.5 years ago when I last played this game. For that it looks quite good, but of course it's not up to the modern standards. Even something like AMS looks better. But for what it is, and especially given how old it is, it looks very sort of hard to argue with. Given its age, it's pretty good. You probably notice it more in the 3D models of the drivers and the cars. It's not great. And then the sound. Perhaps if you haven't played the game, you're thinking, well, that's a bit, the engine sound isn't not great. It's actually great, but hear me out. It's not samples, right? So it's some form of synthesis, but not just random sounds. I remember a utility called Live for Speed Tweak. You could adjust the engine configuration. So if you made a flat 6, you would get sort of a Porsche sound. If you make a flat 4, it would be a bit like a Subaru. Or an inline 5, you would get that Volvo 850 type sound. So they have sort of a clever mechanism in there that produces engine sounds based on the displacement and the cylinders and if it's a V or inline, that actually sort of sound realistic. Now, immediately I will confess that it doesn't actually sound that great, but imagine this is like so old, this ran perfectly fine on a single core Pentium 3, probably. I don't really remember what I had back then, probably a Duron 800. But so it's pretty light on the CPU, yet it can sort of generate its own sound. So I'm really curious if you devote one CPU core to this. I'm pretty sure with the clever programmers that they were doing it these days, you would get really good engine audio without having to record any sound yourself. And while I am way more into physics than into audio, one of the big problems with sound in games is that you rely on source material. You need samples, you need recordings of the car, and you always have problems when you record car sounds because there's wind sounds or transmission sounds getting in the way, and the car is always accelerating or braking, and you need a constant RPM sample. So you need a lot of messing about with audio programs to get audio samples for your racing games, and it's time consuming and expensive, and most of all inconsistent, because one car you might get the microphones just right and it might not have a lot of wind sound and transmission noise, and then the other car you don't have enough time to set it up properly and you have some issues with background noise, and that means that each car in your game will sound different in quality. So if there's one thing at Live for Speed that I think is super promising, is that if somebody would devote one CPU core, which would be literally 100 times or 200 times more CPU power than we have in this audio generation thing here, I think we could get really good engine sound with just like a couple dozen parameters generated live, and that would make the engine sound way more consistent, and I think it can actually get closer to what it has to be. Otherwise the sounds are really sparse. There is sort of a road rumble and tire skid sound, and a bit of transmission whine. What's also lacking, and they could have done this, but I suppose they just didn't, this is so old, there's no real dynamic range in the engine. So when I'm off the throttle versus on the throttle, there's barely any dynamic range, and that's something you could also do with the synthesis engine. I'm sure you could do lots of stuff there. So audio-wise, it's not great, although I do find that generated synthesis of engine sounds super interesting, and I hope that gets done more and better. And everybody has 6-core CPUs now, why not use some for audio? So graphics and sound, strange, different. That's what Live for Speed is, different. That's what makes it cool. Force feedback is interesting. I did play this for a little while with my Logitech G25, which I got late 2007. And it definitely sort of pulls to the expected side. It's a little fake off center, but I found that with AMS2 and also a little bit with RF2 that perhaps AMS is too responsive off center. I don't know, but it's quite fake. You also feel the road surface come through and bumps a little bit, but not much. But it does pull into the direction you expect, but here it's, see, that's really loose, sort of vague. Oh boy. So I wouldn't call it perfect. It loads up, and it seems more like a spring that loads up, and it doesn't really go light beyond a certain point. It just keeps ramping up, or at least reaching sort of a constant force. However, when you lock the tires, the force feedback does get light. So, it's not the best, I think. Plus, I think that unresponsiveness around center is just not how tires and self-aligning torque works. But it is quite passable and quite easy to, catch slides. It's quite natural in that regard. I think we locked the tires at some point. This is another interesting thing, going back to the physics. This display here with the tire, inner, middle, outer, and if you have the tire here, well, let's look at my wheel, it's divided into little sections. So if you lock up, you get a flat spot, which is sort of like, again, this is 16, 17-year-old game. And you see there are bits of red. Now if I go real slow, oh, it auto clutched. I can't, I want to stop on the flat spot. Yeah, well, Very briefly you saw something red, so it keeps track of like a pie slices, pizza slices. I'm particularly hungry. I long more for pizza than for pie, so let's make them pizza slices. And it would keep track of the wear and temperature of all those slices. So you have 3 over the width of the tire, and then I don't know how many, 24 or something, quite a few. And it would keep track of temperature, wear, and stuff like that. So that's really neat. Also flawed, as we will get into, but I think anyway. So it's just different. Oh, we have a G meter here, and these are some really good street tires. Let's start again. Oh, actually, let's do a bit of bits. So you can change the setup. There are not that many limits. With the brakes, you can set the braking torque and the balance, of course, suspension, spring, dampers, anti-roll. The ride height reduction, this is weird. So you don't really see the ride height. It's just sort of the length of the spring when you change this. It's a bit odd, you know, some things are slightly odd, but typical suspension stuff you can do here. You can set Ackermann steering lock, toe in, toe out, that sort of stuff. Final drive, you can do very, very detailed gear ratios, up to the 1/1000th of a ratio, different differential types. A lot of stuff is there, different tire types. Typically there are some compounds, road super and knobbly, hybrid, road normal. There's also rallycross in this, so that's pretty cool. And another super neat feature, you can put passengers in the car. And the hilarious thing, there's a tiny little box of a car, and you can fill it up with male passengers because they are the heaviest. And then the car is even slower than it used to be. So, and it's also nice, and then you drop the car, and then there is, you see the suspension. Physics-wise, I think this highlights some of the choices that were made in this older sim, that it's not like a fully 3D suspension model, but it's more sort of a 2D wishbone thing. So if I drop, so I don't think there's like a bump steer and stuff like that. It's sort of 2D, which is of course easier to model. I also don't think it's like a rigid body system with everything computed like R Factor and R Factor 2 and AMS and Project Cars 2 and AMS 2 do it. I'm not sure if Assetto Corsa is somewhere in between, but it's sort of simplified in that regard. But you know, you have to go back 17 years, so it's not like it's strange that it's like that. Forces. Yeah, you get them tire force graphs and stuff. Yeah, it's pretty good. If a bit quirky, but not too bad. Now let's actually drive this thing in some anger. Let's remove that. You also have to press the clutch. Just one of those things that was very nice back then, because R Factor wasn't out initially, I think, 2005-ish. And then it didn't have that feature, and here it was just, on some of the cars you had to lift, like the Formula BMW single-seater, lift to shift, here clutch, you know, that added a bit of realism. And take the curb. And it's surprisingly natural, easy to drive. And I remember having so much oversteer with this car. But it was probably a bit more force feedback. Oh, that's a bit much. The steps in force feedback are 5% and it's clipping at about 20, so you only have a few steps, which you can adjust with the keyboard. So I'm really positively surprised how natural this feels. And this combined braking and steering feels really good. However, lift-off oversteer into corners is very pronounced. And again, this is a Larry car, of course. It's a little floaty, perhaps. Also, the steering off center is just like the 4C-back, doesn't do that much. It definitely drives a little different than AMS or RF2. It's sort of a bit sluggish in its how it reacts, even though this is of course not a sluggish car. It's not consistent. I mean, it's not like it feels like it's heavy. It doesn't. That's weird. It changes direction quite quickly and it's quite pointy, but it also needs a bit more steering lock. Oh boy, that's not good. Game angry at Niels. Needs a little more steering lock off center to get going. It's very easy to get into a very big slide, and the slides are fairly lazy, but it's not as bad as I remember. I remember just only sliding, and this, like leaning on the nose while braking, feels pretty good. And there's a lot you can do with the setup, of course, with the diff and anti-roll bars and everything does seem to work as you would expect. You have to drive it in a different way. For a chicane like this, you have to start committing to that chicane almost more like a rallying, where you have to set the car up and steer way earlier than the actual corner. Whereas that's always true in any racing car. You have to do things a little bit ahead because it takes a while for everything to react. But it seems here like you have to do it a bit more than with some of the new sims. But how this feels, how natural it is, how easy the 4C-back helps you to drive, and then remembering that it's basically unchanged since 2004, 5, 6-ish is quite amazing actually. And this is definitely a lot of fun. Doesn't go for, oh boy, the entire game, as we will find some flaws in a minute, or at least something I'm subjectively not a fan of. But this is the first thing I tried yesterday when installing this, and yes, really like so pointy and easy to correct. Extremely nice. Lap invalidated. So you could just like sideways on the brakes, no problem whatsoever. It's really nice. I remember this was when we had Grand Prix Legends. It's very flawed physics in the sense that you could not correct oversteer, It's the Dave Kemmer physics, where he's never made a sim where you can properly power slide. That was something I played a lot. R Factor is, before I started modding and before other people sort of figured out how it worked, was also not really controllable on the limit. So this was definitely the first sim where you could throw it into a corner and not die. Making it all the more impressive in hindsight that it still actually holds up with this car surprisingly well. Like I said, force you back not perfect, but it does help you with opposite lock. And of course you would expect this car to be quite pointy. So, quite a few positives then. What are some of the negatives that I found? Well, let's pick another car track combo. What was the combination that I did? Let me just double check we're still recording. We are, that's good, because I don't want to do that again. Actually, I do, don't mind. Even that, like, what's wrong? I think I'm running at full screen and yet Alt-Tab is instant. How many games? Oh, Alt-Tab, oh no, I don't understand this. Wait, chill. I gotta invent the wheel first and then finally you've switched screens. It's all so immediate and I don't know what it is, but it's really nice. Oh boy, yes, which track did I do? That's probably not it. It's more probably... I did something yesterday. I'd say it's this one. Is there a bridge in here? I don't know. Let's see. Alright. I don't know all the tracks anymore. That's definitely a thing. Let's take this one with the fail setup. It does, you know, you do feel quite a difference with setups. I'm just not sure if this is the track that I drove. Well, we'll see. So this is a 4-cylinder. Bit droney. It's very typical of sort of raised. Ooh, steering is heavier. It's turbocharged and quite... Oh boy, what's this? It's very different. Feels super different, of course. This is way heavier. Oh wow, it's this feels really slow motion-ish. I think I did something wrong. I think I have knobbly tires on. At least I did find the track that I wasn't sure I was able to find. Tires, knobbly. No, I don't like knobs. Road super. And same on the back. You can do front and rear compounds. So let's hope this fixes it. So this is a turbo car. It's really sluggish turbo. So I'm not sure about the turbo modeling. It's probably a little simple. But it's still quite natural. That's quite nice. Here we arrive at a very quick chicane. it does feel more, I don't know, like rallying. That I have to do it, set it up here, and then and then lift off is so easy to get the back going. There is some reverb of, oh that's not good, of the walls and stuff. So in that regard audio is neat, but you hear it's very bland. There's just some rumble, an engine, a very small dentist drill. And some tire slip. And if you're off throttle or a little on the brakes, there's lots of oversteer waiting to happen. So you do feel a big difference between the lighter Caterham and this. Where the Caterham was a little sluggish in a weird way, but still it was a very light car and still responded quickly. This feels a bit more sort of sluggish. I don't know what it could be. Perhaps, you know, with these physics engines that are not like super advanced multi-body, rigid body stuff, perhaps some effects are not there or simplified. Perhaps the slip angle of the tires is just too big. Too large slip angles, makes it sort of floaty and a little sluggish, but at the same time I need a bit more steering lock than I would imagine, given the steering lock in the car setup, the front tires and the 720 degrees of lock should be very direct, but it feels like you need a lot more lock before they start to work. So perhaps the tires have a too large peak slip angle, or but at the same, it is really natural, you know. See how I'm at will. Oh, that's going wide. Have we bent it? We'll see. Oh, that's not good. Well, now we definitely bent it. I don't know if you can damage the cars. I'm assuming you can. So let's do one more lap here. And then do a bit of physics problems. You can barely hear the turbo. It's really slow to spool up. So I wonder how complicated that is. It's super that they have like the individual pizza slices with the tire heat and stuff like that, but what is strange is that if there's one thing that seems to be true about tires, if you drift a little bit or lock up, the heat is instant and it also evaporates instantly, and here it's the opposite. The heat comes in really slow, as if it's measured perhaps way deeper, or I don't know, it's definitely weird. And the tires are also really sensitive to the temperature. So if we start doing this a bit more, it takes quite a while for the tire to heat up. It's so natural, and natural, I wouldn't say natural, easy. And it doesn't do weird things, it's just that you wonder if it's all a little bit too sort of flexible and not quite enough power to do it in third gear. You enter so early and still... Oh, that's fine. But now it's already getting a bit red, the tire there, so we'll just continue this behavior. But it's still surprisingly good. Oh shit. And we're dead. In fact, let me go to the skid pad to show you the main problem with the tires and how they are done with... let's see, we have the Autocross skid pad. Yes, please. What's also nice is that it remembers your setup. This was like, it's hard to imagine now because we have some sims that are different than what we had with Grand Prix Legends and RF1. But this power sliding around a skid pad, it's not something we could easily do. There wasn't anything that allowed you to do this. Grand Prix Legends was the more opposite lock you apply, the bigger your crash, and all you could do was sort of steer the other way. And ironically, that's still kind of how it is in iRacing. But you see the tire slowly getting red. Oh, poke the screen. So it's weird that it takes many roundabouts to reach 100 degrees. A bit of lift off gets it. And I'm feeling it going really mushy now. To be so to get really careful with the throttle. And if you can probably read the G-force, it's like 0.8 when drifting. Yeah, 0.8-ish perhaps when really sideways. Hard to look at that G meter. So, alright. And then it's just sort of, alright, 150 degrees on the outside. It takes forever to come down. So that's just a strange way to model the temperatures, that it's so slow to increase and so slow to drop off. Whereas in real life, tires heat up like this on the surface anyway. Takes a lot of time to transfer back into the tire and the pressures to increase. But so that's a weird thing, and the feeling of the car changes a lot when it gets warm. It's not necessarily hard to drift like this. You get a really floaty rear end, and then Live for Speed was a very popular drift simulation, but I think it's pretty good with normal temperatures, but once they get hot like this, it's not really like drifting at all, to be honest. Let's do one more car. I'll do the H shifters today, and I might try some of the others, but I think the road cars do work best. One cool car that I was quite disappointed by actually was the FZ50 GTR. Looks a bit like a GT3 car. It's oh, was this my setup? Yeah, probably. With an H pattern gearbox, looks a bit like a GT3 car, cool. Let's go to Aston. What did I do? No. No, I did a track. Was it Aston? No, it wasn't Aston. Was it Aston? You tell me. West Hill. I think this was it. Yeah. The loading times. Amazing. Well, we saw that with only 50 megabytes. So we have sort of a flat 6 sound. You know, if you just imagine 15 years of development and 200 times the CPU power, what engine sounds could be like. I don't like these the quicker cars. First of all, the big problem is it's very loud. It's very floaty, strange. And on the road car you sort of expect that. Possibly, like it's a bit like a Starion. What is it, Mitsubishi Starion? A bit old school of a road car, and this is sort of a tight GT car, but isn't really tight. And a big problem is, look at the G-force if you can read it. So to a 2.7 through the corners there. So this has nothing to do with GT3 cars. It's, you know, GT3 cars might do 2 Gs in a pretty high speed turn. So this is probably more like DTM grip wise than our Gen GT racing. So it feels very alien. And there's just so much grip, you cannot really break loose. Off throttle is very easy. But it feels very floaty, very weird. So these cars feel terrible in my opinion. Again, the lack of sound detail, there's a bit more transmission whine, but oh, miss shifts. But it's super floaty, and the linear sort of spring feel of the force feedback is also not great. Let's see how fast we can brake, what sort of G-force we can get on the braking. That's not too bad, although I might have been limited by the brake strength. So grip levels of this car are strange, it's really floaty. Still controllable. But this is where it sort of falls apart. And I think a reason for that is just the development hasn't continued. Like, this is 15 years ago, we didn't have a good GT sim, well, perhaps GTR2. But not much was known, and I don't think Scaven got a lot of data, if any, from racing cars, so he also didn't know what sort of the specs were. It feels like this still is sort of an early, like, spare time project where he got some of the default numbers in and just left them there for 15 years. And there might be a lot more potential in this, who knows, you know, if modding was allowed or people got to the bottom of all the parameters. I think it could have done more, but at the same time it's also not that complicated. Like the things it models, I mentioned sort of the lack of a 3D suspension, probably. Aerodynamics are really simplified as well. I think it's just a downforce and a drag that they give the car, so it's not ride height dependent and stuff like that. Hugely important in real racing cars and GT cars as well. So you don't have the pitch sensitivity, ride height sensitivity and stuff like that. Another problem is engine modeling. That the throttle that you have to input. So in Top Gear I'm about 50% throttle and I get no acceleration in really low revs. So this is something I think we'll see in Assetto Corsa as well when I play that again. It's just weird engine modeling where you take so much throttle at low revs to get any torque, and that's just not how engines work. So I saw that with the Caterham as well. Your starting point is 75% throttle, and then you only have that little bit of throttle to play with out of the corner. That's not very good either. I can't really blame Scaven for not knowing that, and R-Factor did it just as badly. So there are some definite downsides as well, but looking at it, sure, it's old, but it's sort of clean. It runs on my shoe, probably, if there's an SD card. No, there's no SD card slot in there. I'm pretty sure it would have run on my shoe if it only had a SD card slot or a USB input. And of course there's a free portion of it. You can drive some of the cars at one track for free. So that's definitely good. So I think that sort of sums up the experience with these age pattern shifting cars, and it works pretty good for the Caterham and the other cars, but the more advanced the cars get, I have the feeling they sort of lack detail and feel. I might do another video with the open wheelers, but then we will see the same issue where the aerodynamics are so simplified, as far as I know anyway, no ride height sensitivity, and the grip being probably quite high if these are sort of the same slick tires that are on the single seaters. It's very hard to unstick the car from power, but then you lift off and you get a big slide. So the weirdness of the slick cars, well, I don't have a lot of hope for the more complicated single seaters, but I might give it a go. So in conclusion then, after 12.5 years, and I think surprisingly little has been done to this sim other than adding VR support and triple screen support and a couple of updates, I'm partially super impressed, and partially, yeah, it does show its age and it does show that other sims have advanced beyond it. But 15, 16 years ago, the smile this put on our faces when we actually controlled a slide in a car for the first time in a sim, because in GTR we sure couldn't, in R Factor we sure couldn't, and in Grand Prix Legends we weren't even allowed to think about it. And online was great too. You could join races while they were going on, start from the pits, and the online code was pretty good. So yeah, it had a lot of stuff going for it, and just the intuitiveness of all the menu options being adjustable on the fly. It's a very, very nice piece of software in that regard, but it does show that it hasn't been developed for the last 15 years other than some features, I think. So yeah, Live for Speed. If you haven't played it, it's definitely worth giving a go, especially since there is a free version. And you don't want to know what I've spent on iRacing since joining that. And here I spent £24 17 years ago, and I'm still playing it. So the value proposition is definitely a good one. Anyway, that's sort of a not quick look at some of the cars in Live for Speed. What an interesting game sim it is. Hope you enjoyed that. I will install some more sims and games and see if I can make some more videos. And yeah, and that's my nose. Where's the mouse? Yeah, thank you, mouse. Bye bye, guys. See you soon.